Welcome, everyone. I'd like to introduce Jim Reed, our next congressman.
All right, well, first of all, thank you all for coming. This is the way we've got to proceed for the next month in these kind of fundraising, because fundraising is such a big part of the campaign. But I thought I would start, and I realize this is kind of like preaching to the choir, but I thought I would start by talking a little bit about Wally Herger and why, after 24 years in office, it really is time for him to retire. I guess there's 4 points that I always like to sort of emphasize. The first one is, all right, so in 24 years, what piece of legislation do you think of that he sponsored that actually got passed? 24 years, think about that for a minute. There is one. There is one, and it was one about 12 years ago. And it was when the district was a little bit different. It's called the Quincy Library Act. And so that one piece of legislation that he happened to have Dianne Feinstein on his side on in the Senate, he was able to get through. And that was 12 years ago. The district's changed, and he hasn't had any important legislation that he sponsored since then. He may have sponsored some legislation, but of course it didn't get passed. So that's one. He's really not contributing from that standpoint. The second thing is he's not really representing the district, the people in the district. He is representing the Republican Party.
Yeah, true.
And if you look at the statistics over his 24 years, he's voted the straight Republican line 94% of the time. And in the last 2 years, it's actually been 96% of the time. And the thing that I wonder about that, it's clear that the Republican Party simply tells him how to vote, and he votes that way. Now, why then isn't it 100%? Why isn't he following the Republican Party line 100% of the time? Well, I think if you read the letters to the editor in the Record Searchlight, you probably already know the answer to this. About 3 or 4 months ago, there was an immigration issue that he voted on, and it was an issue that he voted for immunity to illegal workers in California. And this is so contrary to anything he's ever talked about or ever said he would do. And so he was asked, you know, how could you vote this way? And of course, it's always a spokesperson that answers the questions like that. And the spokesperson came out and said, well, quite frankly, there was an amendment at the end of the bill, and he pushed the wrong button. So the reason he doesn't vote the party line is he occasionally makes mistakes. Probably the single most important thing that I would hope, if you haven't heard me talk about this before, that you will take away from today's meeting, and the brochure, this brochure is an attempt to kind of lay it out. But what happened is the public broadcasting system, the NewsHour, did a survey about it actually was published about 4 months ago. It's called Patchwork Nation. If you watch the NewsHour, you hear a lot about it. But what they wanted to do is kind of analyze over the entire nation where the federal spending went, and basically allow everybody to look at their particular county and see how their county is doing in comparison to other counties throughout the nation. And they broke it into some about 5 or 6 categories, because if you're in the middle of New York comparing it with some rural area, it doesn't make sense to compare. And Shasta County closest falls into what they call the rural area or tractor counties. And in the survey, they found that basically throughout the nation, the federal government spends about $18,000 per person per year in those kind of counties on an average across the nation. All right, so now we know 18,000 is the average. What is Shasta County? And take a look at this. It has about 5 or 6 northern counties, because they're all pathetically low, but Shasta County is actually the worst, $10,253. So that means if you multiply, it's less than 60% of the average. If you multiply that towards times the number of people in Shasta County, that's over $1 billion a year that this county has fallen below average. Can you imagine what the economy in Shasta County would be like if we had an extra $1 billion every year flowing through the economy? I guarantee our unemployment rate would not be above the national average. In fact, I believe it would be below the national average. And what it comes down to is this. There are 435 congressmen back in Washington, D.C., and most of them are fighting for every dollar for their district, because that's how you get reelected. But Wally Herger hasn't had a real battle for 15 or 20 years now. And so, in my view, he's gotten lazy. And so he's not in there fighting for those dollars for each county. And if you look at the history, it's gotten worse and worse until it's gotten pathetic like it is now. And so, if you'll take these brochures and talk to your Republican friends, this is something your Republican friends will understand, that we are not getting our fair share of the taxes we're paying back in this county. And that's what I feel like one of the main things I can do if I replace Wally Herger come January. I'll be fighting for every dollar. Even if I bring it back to average, we're going to be so far ahead you won't be able to believe it. And then the final thing I wanted to say about Wally Herger, and I'm only bringing this up because it's such a key issue right now, the Gulf oil spill. About 5 years ago, a group of Congress people, including Wally Herger, were able to push through a bill that encouraged offshore drilling. And how did it encourage offshore drilling? It said, we will put a cap of $75 million on any damages that occur from an accident offshore. And
Real good, didn't it?
well, you know, BP in this terrible catastrophe we had has agreed to not abide by that law. They're going to pick up the bill, and it's a publicity issue. But here's what's important about that. When BP, and it's not only on this particular oil drilling rig, but on all of their oil drilling rigs, made decisions to cut costs, to take a little bit of a chance, because it was going to be such a savings over all these rigs, they were thinking to themselves, but the worst that can happen is we'll be in for $75 million. So it was actually that law that encouraged BP to do what it did that caused this terrible disaster that we have. And Wally Herger was in the forefront of getting that passed. I mean, in California, we have the medical malpractice cap of $250,000 on general damages. And you still hear a lot of people talking that should be national because it's worked so. California has had it for 30 years now. It's worked so well. I mean, the theory is that the cost of malpractice insurance for doctors are going to come down. Well, guess what? California has about the highest malpractice charges of anywhere in the nation. So these caps just don't work, and they don't even make any sense.